The Australian Financial Review.
When a Melbourne rock band called the Nubiles played gigs with Midnight Oil, The Village People and Hoodoo Gurus in the 1980s, there was a chemistry student from Monash University in the Shadows, working the spotlight. He had known the lead singer of the Nubiles since kindergarten, and he'd become the band's regular roadie.
I am completely amusical. I can't sing. So I was the original singer of the band, actually, but I'm terrible at it. And I can't play an instrument. So I ended up doing the lighting, which I love doing that.
3 decades later, the spotlight has shifted onto that roadie. He's come up with a method for making clean, green hydrogen that doesn't need renewable electricity and doesn't need the expensive equipment that's normally required to make green hydrogen.
It's just some water, some sunlight, some mirrors, and a very special photocatalyst.
One of Australia's biggest companies has this year swooped to buy a slice of his project. And if it works on a grand scale, that roadie might have neutralised one of the feistiest debates that's raging in the Australian energy sector.
The future is electric.
Green hydrogen is the solution.
So today on Tech Zero, we're bringing that roadie out of the shadows and putting him in the spotlight.
Hi everyone, my name's Greg Mather. I'm from the University of Adelaide, and I'm here to talk to you about my technology that uses concentrated light to convert water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Everyone knows we need to do something about climate change, but what's not clear is how do we fix it?
Low emissions technologies.
There is net zero modelling.
Change is coming whether you like it or not.
Change isn't just coming, it's already underway. We're living through a massive industrial revolution where just about everything we do is going to have to change in less than 3 decades. Empires are going to crumble and fortunes are going to be made. I'm Peter Kerr from the Carbon Challenge team at the Australian Financial Review, and this is Tech Zero. It's a podcast about the big green ideas that could get us to net zero and the inspiring people who are putting their heart and soul into making them work. A big stoush kicked off in October when the entrepreneur and policy wonk Saul Griffith stood up at the Financial Review's Energy Summit and warned that Australia's plan to become a green hydrogen superpower was a big waste of time and money.
We have drunk the Kool-Aid and we're about to squander a decade. We should temper our enthusiasms for hydrogen solving any domestic economy problems. We are still being dragged into it by Germany, Japan, other nations that have had hydrogen as a national security strategy, more so than really an energy strategy.
Green hydrogen is a carbon-free flammable gas. You make it by using renewable electricity to charge a piece of equipment called an electrolyser. And that electrolyser then splits water, which is H2O, into H's and O's, hydrogen and oxygen. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's expensive. A report published by Advisian last year put the cost at about $4 a kilogram before you include the transport costs. And that's about double the price of hydrogen made from fossil fuels. And so the government reckons green hydrogen prices will need to get down to about $2 a kilogram to be competitive. And Saul Griffith reckons we can make better use of the huge volumes of renewable electricity that would be needed to get green hydrogen down to $2 a kilo.
To get $2 a kilogram, which is our stretch target, hydrogen, you have to start with 2 cents per kilowatt hour electricity. If you have 2 cents per kilowatt hour electricity, why would you waste a quarter of it in the electrolysis, waste another bit in another 15% in the compression, and another 50% in the fuel cell or the combustion engine coming out, making it 4 times at least, probably 5 or 6 if you include CapEx, more expensive than just doing the whole thing you were going to do with hydrogen electrically anyway.
Greg Mather's a hydrogen guy, but if you expect him to mount a defence against Saul Griffith's prosecution, you're going to be disappointed. By and large, he reckons Saul Griffith is right.
I would completely agree. The bulk of the decarbonisation must come from electrification. It's the cheapest way of removing our reliance on carbon. So it could be that in 10, 20 years' time, we have excess electricity. In that case, it may therefore be economically beneficial to use that excess electricity to make the hydrogen through electrolysis. But right now, when we're screaming for as much electrons from renewable energy as we can, I just can't see how it's going to be economically viable to use a significant proportion of that electricity to make hydrogen. That said, if we need to go to zero emissions by, and everyone's saying 2050, then there are some sectors that are just impossible to decarbonise with electricity. And that is heavy industry and long-distance transport, so whether it be for freight or for people. And that's where you need a fuel, because a fuel has an incredible energy density compared to electricity. And so you need that instantaneous burst of energy for a variety of things in industry.
Greg wants to satisfy that strong demand for green hydrogen, but he also wants Saul Griffith to sleep soundly at night. And to do that, he plans to make green hydrogen without soaking up renewable electricity, or any electricity for that matter. He's going to use a process called photocatalysis.
When people ask me what I do, like my mum asked me what I do, it's quite easy to explain photocatalysis, because you just say, imagine you could take a chemical, drop it into a glass of water and expose that glass of water to the sun, and then you would get hydrogen and oxygen bubbling off. It sounds like pixie dust, and that's what it is. That's what it does. But it's very, very sophisticated pixie dust. This has been known since the 1970s. But what we have found is that it can be very efficient using it under concentrated light. So if you double the concentration of light, you get twice the amount of hydrogen and oxygen. If you triple it, you get 3 times, and so on.
Greg wouldn't tell me what was in the pixie dust that he drops into the bucket of water. And that's partly because it would give away the intellectual property of the researchers who supply it to him. But suffice to say, they're small metal particles. If you go hunting through the academic research online, you'll notice that titanium dioxide is often mentioned as a good catalyst for turning water into hydrogen. That's not to say that's what's in Greg's pixie dust, but, that'd be my stab in the dark. If I watched you add your metal catalysts to the bucket of water, what would it look like? Is it like, you got a scoop of washing powder and you're just dropping in some white powder? Is that what it looks like?
Yep. And you would see bubbles coming off.
Immediately?
Immediately. So it's commingled hydrogen and oxygen. 2/3 of the bubbles are H2 and 1/3 of the bubbles are O2. We obtain our secret herbs and spices under an agreement that we have with somebody else. So I can't tell you exactly who that is or what's in it, but generally it needs to be at heart a semiconductor. So it needs to have the right energy levels so that with the incoming energy from the photon, you can drive an electron from what we say is the valence band to the conduction band.
Remember how Greg said you get more hydrogen if the light you shine into the bucket is more concentrated? Well, that's a big part of his work. He isn't casually just putting this stuff out in the afternoon sun. He spends a lot of his time in the lab, souping up a beam of light that's strong enough to drill a hole in your hand if you're not careful. In your lab, it is a bit like a spotlight, isn't it? It's like an ultra-strength spotlight you have there for your technology.
Absolutely, that's what we do. So we use high-intensity LEDs, and now we're just starting to do experiments on high-intensity solar simulator, concentrated solar simulator, and it is a dangerous beast. It can deliver up to a maximum of 1,000 suns concentrated into a very small spot. So it could easily start a fire. Easily.
Wow.
As well as other hazards, skin hazards, eye hazards. So this is a lamp that simulates the solar emission. And so we focus that onto our reactor, which has the photocatalyst in, to make our hydrogen and our oxygen.
So if I was walking through your lab right now, what would that solar simulator look like?
It just looks like a big box with a very intense lamp inside it, with a whole lot of mirrors and optics to sort of shape the beam.
Okay.
It's got a whole lot of safety devices around it, so it's all screened around welding. Ever been inside a welding pod? It's got those sort of greenish curtains, so that's surrounding, just so that others in the lab are safe from any stray light. We need to be very careful about the way that we control the heat, because it gets very, very hot as well.
As Greg mentioned earlier, he didn't invent photocatalysis, but he has put a few of his own tweaks on the idea. And in mid-October, his application for a patent was approved. The patent took a bit longer than expected, and I know that firsthand because he wouldn't do this podcast with me until he had the patent in his back pocket. Why will your technology be better than using an electrolyser to make green hydrogen? What's going to be your advantage?
So it doesn't rely on the generation of electricity. It doesn't rely on any electricity market. It doesn't rely on purchasing large capital equipment such as electrolysers. At its very simplest, it's just some water, some sunlight, some mirrors, and a very special photocatalyst.
Aside from those years working as a roadie for the Nubiles, Greg has spent his whole career in academia, and this hydrogen project has kind of brought together two of the big themes of his career. On one hand, he studied laser chemistry, which is using light to cause reactions, but he also spent a fair bit of time studying small metal particles and the way they cause catalytic reactions. Those two worlds came together in about 2014 when he decided he could really make a difference in the world by using those two skill sets to make green hydrogen. Not many people were talking about hydrogen. It wasn't fashionable in 2014. Do you feel like you were sort of reasonably rare back in those days when you were sort of thinking, oh, hydrogen could be a clean energy of the future?
Yeah, I think I saw the wave coming and prepared myself to ride it. But I also had to think, internally about how could I contribute meaningfully to it. So you get to a point in your career when you think, okay, what's going to be my legacy? And I've got a lot of papers published on metal clusters, lots of nice, what I think, fundamental work, a lot of theory to underpin that work. But I got to the point where I'm thinking, okay, it's time to do something meaningful if I can. So that's why I was always prepared to pivot at least part of my research towards renewable energy.
That sort of feeling that you just described, is that about money or is that about wanting to help the world?
No, about wanting to help the world. I have a joke in my family where I say that I'm, trying to save the world. So I've been saying it a long time.
And given that you won't require electricity, is this most likely to be a solution for off-grid locations?
Yeah, we think one of the low-hanging fruits of its application is for use in off-grid situations, so mining sites, for example.
It's funny he should mention that. One of Australia's biggest mining companies swooped in this year to buy a stake in the holding company that owns Greg's project. And we'll tell you more about them after the break.
The time has come. Green hydrogen is going to have its day and the world will never go back to the rubbish bin.
As you probably know, that was Andrew Forrest talking to Bloomberg on a TV interview. He's Australia's second richest person and almost certainly the world's biggest hydrogen bull.
This is a multi-generational change. This is a forever change. And we're saying to the world, the time to get out of the rubbish bin, time to get out of the carbon toilet is now. Green hydrogen is your only answer to make that happen.
The changes he's pushed through at his iron ore mining company Fortescue over the past 3 years have been quite amazing to watch. Fortescue decided to diversify into clean energy around 2018. They've since laid lots of bets on lots of different things. They've bought a battery manufacturer. They've signed options on hydroelectric schemes in Africa. And if you listen to the first season of Tech Zero, you'll know they've also acquired a controlling stake in the innovative Dutch solar company that's run by Robert Swanborn. But Fortescue's biggest bet of all is on green hydrogen.
Green hydrogen is the solution and we need...
From nothing today, the company has vowed that by 2030, they'll be producing 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen. And that is a lot in the context of the world's hydrogen supply. According to the IEA, the world will need to be producing about 80 million tonnes of green hydrogen by 2030 to be on a net zero pathway. So if you put those two numbers together, Fortescue will have almost 19% of global market share in green hydrogen if all goes to plan. And with big plans like that, it's little wonder Fortescue's clean energy division, FFI, wanted to get a piece of Greg Mether's work. But he only came onto their radar when FFI poached a Woodside executive who'd been part of an industry collaboration project with Greg in the years gone by.
That person left Woodside and went to work with FFI. So I had been in contact with that person, and as our technology was developing and she was sort of aware of what we were doing, then she asked to get in contact, and that's really how we got in contact with FFI.
At what point did it get to the point where she was, getting in contact saying, let's have a chat about potentially working together?
Early 2021 or possibly mid to late 2020. So it seems like a long time ago for me.
In the years ahead, I wonder if we will look back on that executive's decision to switch from Woodside to Fortescue as a bit of a sliding doors moment for the two companies. After all, Woodside wants to be big in hydrogen too. Fortescue spent $2 million earlier this year buying 20% of the company that now owns Greg's project. It's called Spark Hydrogen, and the other shareholders are Greg's employer, the University of Adelaide, and the ASX-listed company Spark Technologies. For someone who's worked in academia your whole career, are you noticing a difference by having corporate money behind you? Like, does it suddenly feel like it's easier to get the materials you need to do your job and to find out the answers?
That's a really interesting question. So these days, getting research to do fundamental work is becoming increasingly difficult. And if you do get money, you often don't get as much as you asked for, or you've asked for less than you really need because of the limitations of the scheme, the grant scheme. So what has been really nice is when we came up with the project plan, is that I made up what I consider to be a very realistic budget that could cater for all of our requirements. So it's not like I'm want of anything.
Yeah, great.
Which is a nice position to be in.
Fortescue's hydrogen ambitions are so big that they've decided to build their own factory to make electrolyzers.
On Saturday, I announced the $1 billion build of the world's largest green hydrogen electrolyser facility manufacturing plant here in Australia, which will double the world's supply of electrolysers. Not in India, not in China, not in Europe, but in Gladstone, Queensland, Australia. The starter gun has been fired on the journey of bringing manufacturing at home roaring back.
The factory that Andrew Forrest was talking about in that address to the National Press Club will make PEM electrolysers. PEM is an anagram of proton exchange membrane, and they're one of two dominant types of electrolysers in the market today. The other major type are called alkaline electrolysers. Those two technologies work in different ways, but the thing they have in common is that they both need a lot of renewable energy to make green hydrogen. And as we know, people like Saul Griffith see that as a problem. So by investing in Greg Mether's project, which doesn't need any renewable power, Fortescue have diversified their exposure in case a shortage of renewable power really does challenge those dominant electrolyser types. Greg's technology was in the back of my mind when I chatted with Håkon Voldal, the chief executive of the Norwegian company Nel. They're the biggest manufacturer of electrolysers in the world, and they make those two mainstream types we talked about. I played devil's advocate, asking him if PEM and alkaline electrolysers were the equivalent of the horse and cart and would soon be disrupted by new technologies like Greg's.
I think there are 30, 40 different technologies. Only 2 have actually been proven at scale. And that's the hard part, is to take something with, let's say a membrane the size of a stamp, and then scale that up to something which is really big and can help you at the industrial scale. That takes years. So if you want to buy something today for a project that is realized in 25, 26, 27, you only have 2 options. That's PEM and alkaline. It's good that we have innovation. We will innovate the existing platforms, and over time, probably existing systems and technologies will be replaced. That's a natural path. You read all these articles about interesting technologies, but, you have to realize it's really lab technology, it's lab work. So to take that and then, produce 1 gigawatt for a steel factory won't work. Maybe in 8 to 10 years they will be there, but the runway is pretty long on these new technologies.
Greg's the first to admit that his project isn't yet the finished article. His lamp might be able to shine 1,000 suns into his bucket of water, but he's yet to settle on how much light will deliver the best result.
We're exploring what is the optimum level of concentration at the moment. So that's an unknown. We have some ideas, but that's not absolutely nailed down yet.
The method for capturing the hydrogen bubbles that rise out of the water is also still being tweaked.
That's again something else that we're exploring with our technology to see which is the best technology for separating the hydrogen and the oxygen. It's commingled hydrogen and oxygen, and that's one of the disadvantages. So in an electrolyzer, the hydrogen comes off on one side of the system and the oxygen on the other. So it's separated by a membrane. So you end up with pure hydrogen and pure oxygen. But in this case, because it's coming off the one particle, they're commingled. So this potentially adds a hazard to it. So this is one of the things that we need to address.
When do you think that your studies will have reached a point where you can say the optimum amount of light is X and this is the design of the container we need and we're ready for business?
So that relates to the timelines of the joint venture that we have with at least one of the partners you mentioned before. So that's sort of a bit of a secret, but it's not too far away, we think, where we would like to soon start testing under real sun conditions.
Part of your process is about concentrated sunlight. So listeners to Tech Zero might remember an episode that we did on Raygen, where up near Mildura they've got 1,200 giant mirrors around a site and they're concentrating sunlight down to a single beam that's incredibly powerful. If your method comes to fruition and becomes a mainstream way that people make hydrogen, is it likely to look a bit like that? Are we going to see a field full of giant mirrors concentrating a beam of sunlight but channeling it into a fluid to liberate hydrogen?
Yes, that's what it'll look like. So there are quite a few different types of solar field concentrators, and the Raygen one is one sort. So we haven't really got to the point about what's the best sort of field, although we are definitely thinking about it. But that's ultimately what's going to be. It's going to be a field of mirrors.
Back when you were a roadie, you used to work the spotlight on the rock stars, but now you're the guy in the spotlight, right? Like, you're coming through with this technology that big companies like Fortescue are really excited about. Are you comfortable being in the spotlight?
When I was younger, I was known to grace the stage in performances. I've done a play at the university, and so I'm not adverse to being the centre of attention. I guess I've come to realise that it has to be somebody, and if not me, then who? And so that's something that I've been asking myself, that, you know, nobody seems to be doing this, and that's why I started heading in this direction, because I could see that it was a need, and I looked around me and I saw nobody else doing it, and I said, well, then it's got to be me.
Thanks for listening to Tech Zero. This was the 8th and final episode in our 2nd season, but keep an eye on the feed. You never know when we might bob up with a bonus episode. Until next time, take care. This podcast was hosted and written by me, Peter Kerr. It was produced and edited by Lapfan with technical production by Alex Gow. The executive producer is Fiona Buffini. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And consider rating or reviewing us, as it helps us find others. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business, and power. To subscribe to the Financial Review, go to afr.com/subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us here, you can email at techzero@afr.com. Tech Zero is part of the Financial Review's Carbon Challenge franchise.
The Australian Financial Review.